Very warm welcome to Manifesting Ideas with OmniFocus and DEVONthink. And I'm really happy to have my friend Kourosh here today. And Kourosh has been on Learn OmniFocus before. It's actually his third appearance. And he's really, I think, the perfect person to talk about this topic because he's not only written a book on OmniFocus, he's also written a book on DEVONthink. And so I think of anybody in the world we could have on, I think Kourosh is definitely at the top of the list, and really excited to hear what he has to share. And before I introduce Kourosh, I just want to talk a little bit about Learn OmniFocus and what's coming soon. And if you're brand new to Learn OmniFocus, first of all, a very warm welcome. It's great to have you here live today or watching a recording of this session. And I launched this site just over 6 years ago. Not quite sure where it would go, if there'd be enough interest to sustain it in the long term. And I'm happy to report people have joined from over 80 countries over the years, and we have a really thriving international community, and some of you are here joining this session live today. And my intention has always been to support people in living a fulfilling and productive life, with OmniFocus being the focal point. OmniFocus is what we all have in common. It's an app that we all use, even though we might have very different lives and do very different work and so forth. It's that common ground. So along that line, it's not just about using OmniFocus effectively and learning the features. It's also about applying productivity theory and using complementary apps and so forth. So what you're watching now is one of the Learn OmniFocus live sessions. And just to give you a little taste of the types of things that we cover in Learn OmniFocus live. First of all, we have sessions that are around productivity principles. So for instance, I just led a session recently on managing someday maybe with OmniFocus 3. And so we get into some core principles around reviewing and looking at the big picture and managing your day and all those sorts of things, and share them in the context of OmniFocus and complementary apps. And what we're starting to do, and this is actually really the first session in this new series, is to hone in on specific productivity apps. These are ones that we've covered in the past, but a little bit more in passing. And by having a session dedicated to a specific app like we're doing today, we can go in depth and talk about how to use that app alongside OmniFocus. So this is one of many more to come, featuring different apps alongside OmniFocus. And we also have workflow guests, and I really think there's a lot of value in showcasing the way different people use OmniFocus. And OmniFocus is a personal task manager, so there's many different ways to use it. And I think it's really helpful when people come on to share their own workflows. Kourosh has been a workflow guest several times, and we've had some other great guests who have been living and breathing OmniFocus for many years. And then finally, there's the small group Learn OmniFocus office hour sessions. These are sessions that are specifically not recorded. Everyone's asked to be on video and to keep everything confidential. And it's an opportunity to meet some other OmniFocus users, get some help with your setup. And I currently lead all of these sessions. I just absolutely love connecting in the small groups with people from our community. So I hope to see you at one of those sessions. And I also do private consulting. This is something I've been doing even before Learn OmniFocus existed. So if you want some one-on-one help with OmniFocus and your workflows and so forth, you can go to learnomnifocus.com/private and learn more about it and get in touch with me through that form. And before I introduce Kourosh, just a little taste of what's coming soon to Learn OmniFocus. First of all, the Omni Group recently added support for what's called Omni Automation to OmniFocus. And this is basically a cross-platform technology that allows you to extend OmniFocus's feature set. So you can install one of these Omni Automation plugins, and you can run that on your iPhone, your iPad, your Mac, and everything syncs together. So if you install it in one place, it's available to the other devices as well. So there's already some plugins that are available. You can just download and start to use, some from the Omni Group, some from other developers. And while you don't need to know anything about programming to use this technology, if you are a programmer and you know about JavaScript, you can even create your own plugins or customize ones that other people have written. So I'm really excited to have a session dedicated to this topic next month. That'll be August 18th from 10 to 11 Pacific time. And this is really for everybody, even if you started using OmniFocus last week. We're going to go right down to basics. You'll learn how to download and install plugins, how to use them across your various devices, and I'm going to give some specific examples that I think will be useful to most people. So you can even follow along as we go through the session, and then once you're done, you can continue to put that extra functionality to good use. So that's August 18th, 10 to 11 Pacific time. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be doing a series of sessions that focus on using OmniFocus with specific apps and services. So these are the ones that I'm currently working on. I'm developing materials around these, and I'm looking forward to featuring each of these individually. The first one from this list that I'm going to be featuring is Asana, which is an app that I've been using for a very long time now. It's what we use to do all the collaborative work at Learn OmniFocus. So I definitely have a lot of experience using that alongside OmniFocus. And that session will be in September, on September 15th from 10 to 11 Pacific time. And you're very welcome to join, whether you're an Asana expert or even if you've never used Asana and you just want to kind of get a sense of what other tools are out there, what are some things you could use within a team environment, whether it's your family or your team at work, and understand how that can very naturally coexist with the personal task management in OmniFocus. The office hour sessions, there's currently 5 open for registration, 2 more this month and 3 in August. And there's still space, I believe, in all of these sessions so far. So definitely encourage you to come and check out one or more of these. And I'll be adding some September sessions soon. All right, well, without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce Kourosh Dini. And Kourosh, I consider to be my first OmniFocus teacher, because way back when I was first learning OmniFocus, I picked up his book, and it was really instrumental in helping me understand not just OmniFocus, but some really important productivity principles. And he's an MD, a psychiatrist, a productivity expert, author, and musician. So definitely a man of many talents. And he's joining us from Chicago today. He's got a psychoanalyst. He's a psychoanalyst in a private practice in downtown Chicago. And the very first time I met Kourosh was back in 2013. And I have very fond memories of speaking at the same event as him. It's called OmniFocus Setup. And we had a full day dedicated to OmniFocus, and this was before OmniFocus 2 was launched, and he's pictured here along with myself and Sven Fechner, David Sparks, and Merlin Mann. So that was definitely a wonderful experience and one of the sort of a pivotal point in the creation of Learn OmniFocus. If you want to learn about Kourosh's many talents, you can go to Kouroshdini.com, and that talks about all the different facets of his life. And if you want to focus on the productivity aspects of the work he does, you can go to beingproductive.org, and that's where you'll find his books as well. And the 2 books that we're going to focus on today is Creating Flow with OmniFocus, and this is now in its 3rd edition, updated for OmniFocus 3, and the very recently released book called Taking Smart Notes with DEVONthink. And Kourosh is going to share how he melds these 2 technologies and really brings the best of each of these apps to his system. Okay, and without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, Kourosh.
It's always a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited. This is really cool. This is the 3rd time I'm here, and anyway, I'm happy. So in this talk, as Tim pointed out, I'm going to be focusing on bringing DEVONthink and OmniFocus together, and both, as many know, can be very deep programs. These are programs that have lots of levers and buttons and things to push, and can be overwhelming if you don't kind of hit it at a certain angle, I suppose. But once you kind of get into it, they at least to me, they really feel like home. They feel like they make sense and work well. What I'll do today, I'm going to describe some of my use around a single note, or more than that, and hopefully it'll some of that way I present it will be helpful to you. I'd once heard Devonthink and OmniFocus described as a noun and a verb. That you've got like one for reference and you got one for your actions. And I agreed with that at first, and then I still kind of like there's a little bit of truth to it, but it's not entirely correct. So looking at it from a broader perspective, OmniFocus is about orchestrating attention. You create this way of nudging yourself here and there through your day to look at something, and then as you look at that thing, you kind of face your inner demons and decide, is this thing what I want to look at? Is this important or not? And with that, you make a decision, and if it's not something that's worthwhile, you go back to the machine, to OmniFocus, and hammer away at it until it's like it better reflects your interests and responsibilities. And meanwhile, Devonthink is if you really want to use it, there's got to be some degree of action to it. You can use it for storage, and a lot of what I do is use it for storage, and for years that's all I'd been doing. But it's when I started using it for note taking that I think it really kicked the system into a higher gear. And I'm currently in a stage of like I have like a database where it's very much about my notes and note taking, and a lot of other databases that are kind of slowly evolving as I've kind of figured things out and like, oh, I could do that with this. Oh, I could do this with that. And so I might show, you might see some of those. I don't know. But it's it can be at its depth. You can use it to develop meaningful ideas. You can define meaning as a depth and breadth of connection. Things are in a context. Things are how deeply connected they are. Is how much more meaningful they are, and you can even extend that idea to unconscious. That whether it's conscious or unconscious, that the more connections there are, the more meaningful it is. And drawing those connections is part of how you develop it, how you find and create meaning at the same time, and that takes time, and that time is often well served with direct and conscious attention. Or with playful attention, and that's where once you start getting into that, whatever system you use, whether it's Devonthink or otherwise, is where it starts to really take off. For me, it started off when I'd read Sankei Aaron's How to Take Smart Notes, and I was thinking, all right, well, how do I try this? And there's a number of different note-taking possibilities out there. And some of which are still quite useful. There's Evernote, there's Tinderbox, there's Obsidian, there's Roam Research, NVAlt, there's I should have written all these down so I can name them better. But anyway, my apologies to those I've left out. But there are many good ones. The Sankei Aaron's in his had started off with, I think it was called ZKT3 or something like that. And I tried that one a bit, and then there was also he's moved on to Roam Research, I believe. I tried that one. Anyway, they all have very powerful like angles of approach to this idea of note taking. And for me, when I started experimenting with Devonthink's wiki linking system, that's where it kind of went. Oh, you know what? I can create this in the way that I want it to, and let me try this, and really it took off. Now the thing is I still would get after I released. So I wrote a book on Devonthink and note taking. Like I fused these ideas, and so would get a few emails or questions like why this one, when there are especially a lot of nowadays the trend tends to be apps that are dedicated to a thing, right? And they do those things very well, like just simple writing apps, for example, or outlining or whatever. And I think that's wonderful. I think there are many uses to that. thing is, similar to OmniFocus, DEVONthink can act as a hub. And as a hub, it can connect to many different applications, and then it kind of harmonizes it. It brings them together in a certain way. And then you can use just about any program to launch from DEVONthink, to make those things, to use those, and then still keep the raw files within DEVONthink. So as long as those programs have a way to let you access the raw data, the raw text data, then DEVONthink's quite happy to play with that. And so you can have a text file, PDF, music, you can have videos, you can have whatever, and they're all kind of, living together nicely in DEVONthink in a way that kind of, you can connect them. You can say this one's related to that one. You can have notes about them. So, what it winds up being is that I like, particularly for me, is like having the PDFs and the text files in the same area. And I can have like reference each one quite nicely, among other things. And so as a result, it's grown to feel kind of like home base, similar to OmniFocus has for me. So now, how I'm going to be talking here today is, OmniFocus is about guiding your attention, right? Generally, you don't need OmniFocus when you're in the middle of your work. You might want to, as I mentioned, nudge yourself this way or the other. Or maybe you combine it with an alert system to pull you out of a session of something. And then when it's time to wrap up or set things aside, OmniFocus again comes to the fore, and you can use it to do something with it, to set things aside and think about, how will I restart this? How will I get back into it? But your work is generally in the medium of work itself, not in the methods of storage. So what I'll do then is I'm going to describe a bit of a life cycle of a note, or a few notes in DEVONthink, and then how OmniFocus, I might use it, in those stages of, I want to set it aside because it's time to do something else. I'm sick of it. I'm interrupted, or whatever reason that's there. So this is my Slipbox inbox. Slipbox, I've taken the term from Sönke Aaron's book. I also like the phrase note box. Really, it's a dedicated set of individual notes. And the inbox is kind of where I stage it before they enter my entire box of notes. But let's just start with a simple note. I've rigged the system to work with Option M to create a new Markdown note. Let's just say I'm starting to write something. I've already got something here, but I had a song lyric running through my head that I had incorrect, which, how did I have it? I said, yes, from a moment of passion, now they run the place. Now this is incorrect. Now they run the place. And I've deliberately written it as I remembered it, which was incorrect. And the quote is from, if anyone decipher it, is Talking Heads, and she was little creatures. So I have to look at it. I was like, is this right? Is this not? I don't know. Why am I writing this? I don't know what this is about. I don't know where to go with this. So right now it's kind of in this untitled sort of stage, and I don't know where to go with this. So what I can easily do is, every component of DEVONthink has a way to link to it. And what you can do is you go to copy item link. You can also use a key command to mash your fingers on Control Option Command C. It's also in contextual menu, and it's easy. You just copy the command link, call up your quick entry, which I've rigged to Control Option Space, which I think is the default. Open the note field, and you've got it there. And you can say continue developing thoughts on song lyric. Like, why did this come to mind? I don't know. And so there's a few steps in that, and I've got a Keyboard Maestro snippet, which I can show you as well. Let me just go there. Here it is. Basically, you can select that option in copy item link. You can call up the quick entry, pause because it's useful to pause and not throw the system off, open the note field, paste it, and jump back into the task, and you can write the title. So let me close that and just show you how that works. I've got that one at Control-Option-Command-K, and so it just does all of that at once. And since I've already done it, I'm just going to cancel that. So very simple, but it's a way of just saying, okay, I'm done with this for now, and I want to come back to it. So if I go to OmniFocus, here's the inbox, and we can see it. Clicking on it will take us right back. Let's close this out, and let's do it differently. There's a picture of flowers in my garden. I just like that. And it opened it up. It's in a different format. You can see it's kind of rendered it in Markdown here. Or the Markdown has been rendered into what it would look like. This is just a custom inspector. Just close that out. And so I come back to this, and let's say I want to add a thought or two. I don't know what let's say the little actions, big consequences. That sounds about right, right? I don't like commas. Can create big consequences. All right. And let's title this as well. So I just hit Command R. It brought me to where it sits in the database. I'm going to rename it. There we go. And great. So there's that. One thing I want to mention here is that I'm using this to quickly jump back here. There's an Apple script that I'm using. I know that having a conversation with Tim recently, there's a way to do this in a cooler sort of automated way in OmniFocus. But I still have this sort of quick key command, option command space to jump to the thing that is linked from in the note field of a task. So that way I don't have to open the note field. So let's just close that, and you can see it in action again. And let's close that out. And there it is. So it brings you back. So I think that's just a neat sort of thing. It was an Apple script created by Jesse Hollington. I still use it. I think it's great. But yeah, I am definitely curious in Tim's upcoming talk where he'll be looking into the automation. And I'd like to see how to create such a thing. So let's say I come back here and I'm working on this. I'm going to go back into the kind of editing way of looking at it. One of the big things that I've used in my database is just trying to study the concept of story. I've been fascinated with like what makes a story nowadays. So maybe I want to have this sort of idea. I'm like, I don't know where to go with this, but I know I have ideas about characters. So I might say, how can I get a character to show a small action creating a big consequence? Something like that. And let's take a look at it, how this all looks out. So you know what, let's make this nicer. Let's go with this as questions. And you know what, let's make this look nicer. And then I realize later on that this is not the correct quote. Maybe I'll say fix quote later. So but basically just kind of working on it. You'll notice that a couple of things have lit up here. And this is as a result of having the wiki links turned on. I've got wiki links, which is automatic and names and aliases. So this means that anything that has any notes that I have that have this title, character, questions, will be automatically linked. I don't have to do anything. It makes it really nice because sometimes I'll be surprised by something like, oh, I wrote about that, and it kind of shows up. So holding down Command and click brings up this big long thing that I've already kind of thought through a bit, character and story and all the links that is related to that. And so I might use that as a way to develop it. I can also look at maybe some backlinks that might be related. This one, since I've just created it, doesn't have any. But character has quite a number of links that are related. And this is through an Apple script. I might look at the connections. These are the in DEVONthink. These are a lot of different ideas that are suggested. But let's go back over here. These are, without very much written, it's already kind of thought through. Hey, look, there's some things that I might want to relate and think about, and to this original note. I'm very curious about how it might think that Freud's principles might be associated, but hey, it might be cool. Anyway, so it's a nice way to just come back, and at some point I might just say that's enough, and again I have my way of coming back to it. And I might say, okay, this is something I want to continue to develop. So at that stage, I would think of repeating, right? So I go to repeat, and in OmniFocus here, and let's set it to repeat every day or something along those lines, and do it as a deferred date. And so let's say I'm working on it, mark it complete. The link will continue there, and even though it's retained the old name, it still connects. It's a nice link that is robust. Just to go back for a moment about repetition, the thing is that creativity, any sort of anything that you're developing, that could be in art, that could be in business, thrives on the ability to revisit and iterate. So the thing about creativity is that you have some vision that's unclear. Whenever you are figuring out what you're making in the act of making it, you're being creative. So that, again, that could be a business report, as well as, a statue that you're carving out of marble or something. Whatever you thought you were going to create, that practice of maintaining that fuzzy image of the vision is you're going to find deviations from that and realize that what you thought was there wasn't, or that what you thought could be couldn't. When you iterate, when you repeat, that deviation has less of a tendency to be seen as mistake, which often is filled with shame or negative feelings of whatever sort that one has, then kicks in the unconscious mechanisms of trying to defend against them, kick them aside, and hide from them, which can be poison in whether it's, again, artist or business environments. And it becomes much more likely that you start looking at it as a stepping stone, as a developmental process, as something like, oh yes, of course, this is the Bob Ross happy accident. This is the thing to, if I didn't do this, I wouldn't have discovered that. All of that's to say that setting up a repeat to continue developing something, I think, is very useful. It also reduces the workload of setting something aside. So once you've got this, here, that as you wrap up a session of work, a lot of the troubles that I think one gets into in productivity is when they don't do the work of setting things aside, of going through that organizing. Just so I don't leave the word organizing as a jargonistic kind of mess, I look at it as 3 specific criteria. 1, you want to be made aware of something when it's relevant to you. 2, when it is relevant, you want it to be very accessible. And the more accessible, the better. And 3, when it's not relevant, you want it to be completely avoidable. You want it to be preferably invisible. And those 3 things, the better you meet those 3 criteria of awareness, accessibility, and avoidability, the more organized it becomes. All that's to say, repeats are useful. It's my long-winded way of saying that. Now, the other thing, let's say I've done enough in here, and I don't want to do any more editing. Well, no, there's more to edit. I want to do more, but I've had enough of it being in the inbox. It's no longer kind of in this sort of chewing stage. I make GI references. I hope you don't get disgusted by them, but I'm quite entertained by them. And Devonthink can recommend where to put it. And since almost all of my markdown notes tend to be in this sort of my notes area, it says, okay, why don't you put them there? And yeah, most of the time this is correct. And I can hit Control C, or I can double click that, and it'll just send it off there, and it'll move on to the next thing there. So let's go. Frustration as opportunity. This is, by the way, this is live. I've just left some stuff in here. This is my database. So whatever's in here is stuff I've been kind of looking at and thinking about. Now the thing is, now that it's gone, even if I go to OmniFocus and I once again click on it, so now the title of it's changed, the location of it's changed. Click on it, it'll still take you there. It's a very good, robust link. It's one of the things that originally drew me to Devonthink as being a good repository and a good place to hold things. Is that I don't know how often you've run into this, but if you drag an alias into OmniFocus, there's often a break. That like somewhere down the line it'll say, "Please find this note again because I don't know where it is." And I don't think that's an OmniFocus issue. I don't know what the issue is, because Here, uh, I've not run into that issue. This is quite um, uh, robust, quite good, quite helpful. There are programs now that have been developed that help resolve that issue through Finder. So, for example, Hook. I find that very useful. I think that's a good program, and actually can also be integrated a bit with DEVONthink too. So that has some resolution, but still, I find this to be very, very helpful. And this link also stays if you're syncing. You know, if you are syncing across computers, if you're syncing to iOS, there's a DEVONthink to go. As long as you have the file synced, like there's a way to decide if you want the file synced, then it should be able to be accessed. Let's say you're on OmniFocus. You're dealing with OmniFocus on the iOS. All right, so let's move on. Let's say I want to come back to DEVONthink's inbox here, and the thing is you want to have some regularity with it. You want to do something with it. And I'm going to open up the sidebar here, and you can see that it gives you a set of different inboxes. It kind of compiles them all. It kind of puts them all into a set of singular inbox as well as all these individual ones. And I want to, let's say, review this specific Slipbox one with some regularity. And once again, I can use the item link. I can create a task here. And let's say I want to, say, review the Slipbox inbox. And come back here. And I'm not going to move things out of the inbox. I think putting things in projects or else otherwise I'm not going to get into too much of that. But let's just leave it here. And let's say I want to do this, say, weekly. Fridays, why not? Move it to Friday. Maybe it's part of a review system, like part of my reviews or something like that. But it becomes easy that, I can do this. I can go to my inbox and look at what's going on there. One thing is worth noting is that the inbox in DEVONthink and the inbox in OmniFocus are very different from each other. They can be treated very differently from each other, I should say. With OmniFocus, it's pretty, if you're going to go with the GTD method, getting things done method, you want to clear the inbox through a processing mechanism, and that is very connected to what's called a 2-minute rule. In getting things done, there's a nice branch of this, that, and the other, all the things you can decide of what to do with a task or a thing in the inbox. But it all boils down to 2 minutes, essentially. So if it's something you can do, you start at the top and work your way down. If it's something you can do, you do it. If you can do it in 2 minutes or less, you do it. But if it's longer, maybe you delegate it, you put it in a project list, you put it in a action list. And then if it's trash, you trash it. If it's something to file, you file it. All of those other things, trash, file, delegate, put on calendar, whatever, those are all less than 2 minutes too. So eventually you just kind of do everything less than 2 minutes. Whereas with DEVONthink, how you approach it might be different. So I mentioned this sort of digestive approach. This is kind of like, this is where I'm chewing on things. This is where I'm looking at it. I know it's disgusting. I'm really kind of going through these things, and I might want to take my time. As a result of that, I pointed out, I might be looking at, where does it seem to connect, and where does it not? Those all require thought. Again, meaning takes time to develop. As a result of that, think of the verb you're going to use, the task. So I've put down here review, which basically means I can look at it and decide what I want to do with it. The alternative one might be clear, in which case you might have a different approach towards what you're doing. So if you are using DEVONthink primarily for storage, which again is fine, this might totally work. You want to go through it and clear it. You want it to be empty. You can also use a consider term, consider clearing. It's another way to do it, I suppose. I've described this using the word consider elsewhere. That I think it can be very useful for, as long as it's used sparingly in your tasks. It's a way of saying, okay, I'm going to look at this thing and decide what I want to do with it. And once I've made a decision about what I want to do with it, I will go ahead and mark this complete.
One question, Kourosh, on the inbox in DEVONthink. Do you kind of set an upper limit to how long things can be in there? I know for some ideas I have, they might kind of incubate for a year or even longer in some cases. Would you set sort of a limit to say, okay, I've been sort of chewing on this one for long enough and I need to either get rid of it or park it somewhere? What would that thought process look like?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I don't have, I mean, I can imagine kind of creating a smart rule to do something with something that's been there, let's say a week or two, and say, hey, do you really want this in here or not? But I haven't done that. I just kind of look at them and decide, every time I look at it. Because the cleaner the inbox is, the more I'm focused on a particular idea. So these, right now, because I've left these in here over the course of the last week or two, precisely for this meeting today, just kind of give an idea like, hey, there's things in here, then it's a little bit more scattered. Whereas in reality, what I wind up doing is that I might have a stronger sense of like, I'm really wanting to focus on this one idea, and all of these ideas kind of relate together more. So when I approach it with that mindset and I look at it and like, okay, it looks like there's a bunch of stuff in here, I do the work of getting them out of there. It's not connected to some rigid timing system. It's more like I have a thing to do and now I want to clean the plate.
I think you've answered this already, but what would be the main criteria for moving something out? Is it really that you have a place to put it at that point, or have you kind of finished chewing on it and it's kind of gone into the archive? Or
I'm still playing with it, that idea. So personally, the way I do is just I'm kind of finished chewing with it, and whatever that means to me. But I've seen it. So for example, I've been reading Tiago Forte's stuff sometimes. He's got something on like how to take notes and progressive summarization type ideas. And the way, at least the way I interpret his, which I hope I'm getting it right, if I'm not, forgive me. It doesn't look like there's an inbox even. It's just like you add the ideas into the field, or your sea of notes, and you kind of are always developing them, which you can still do. And I actually do I always am developing these as I kind of encounter them. But it looks like there's like no inbox in that process. And you can go anywhere from that to the other side of, I want to have completely thought through all of the links I want. I want to completely think through all of the AI recommended things. I want to, before I move it over. And there's a whole range, I suppose, that you could go. And really it's more functional for me. It's like, okay, I'm more interested in this idea right now, and I want to make the inbox a tool for that idea. And therefore, I should just clear these things out of the way.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. And taking that a step further, at what point would you create a project in OmniFocus to move towards an outcome that is sort of centered around the ideas that you've captured into DEVONthink?
Sure, I will be getting there as well. So I'm going to keep going in this path, but I'll answer that question in the course of the evolution of these things. So the other thing you can do is tags. So one of the things that you might do is, let's say you have things you want to follow up that are in the database. You can do that. You can do very similar to what I showed before. Copy item link, paste it. You've got a follow up, a method that you can add repeats to and the like. This answers the question you were asking, Tim. Sometimes I'll create a tag very specific to a project. This was, I was reading The Inner Game of Tennis by, I think his name is Tim Galloway, I believe. Very good book. I enjoyed it. And I just noticed that I was kind of revisiting the same ideas over and over, and I just kind of created a tag. So what you could do is, let's say you have a project, let's call it Study Inner Game of Tennis, and you might have, copy the link to this one, copy item link, and I might say continue reviewing tag notes, and put that in there, and let's convert this into a project. So there it is, and maybe I have this on repeat or whatever. The thing I wanted to point out here is that you can go in the other direction. So let's say I copy this link from OmniFocus. Oh, I think I have to go there and do that. So if I go into the, I was doing this before as an example, but you go into the generic inspector, and you can connect a URL to it. There we go. You have this link to OmniFocus, and you can launch it, and you can go to OmniFocus from what you were doing in DEVONthink.
Thanks for everything you've shared so far, Kourosh. I think a really key thing I want to point to is you can have even a massive amount of data in DEVONthink and have a very simple OmniFocus project or action or something that taps into that. So I think one of the biggest things people struggle with when they're using OmniFocus is they end up with way too much stuff in OmniFocus. And this is really a way of avoiding that bloat by having a place to put that stuff, being able to search through it, link it together, and so forth, and have OmniFocus be the driver without having the the bloat that comes with trying to kind of overuse OmniFocus. I guess would be one way of looking at it. So one of the key pieces that Kourosh is showing is you can link to really anything in DEVONthink, whether it's a tag or an individual note or something like the inbox where you were showing earlier. And just underline that nice thing is those links don't break. They work even if you get a new Mac or you're on your iPad or whatever that happens to be. Is that a pretty accurate synopsis, would you say, Kourosh?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it can really make it so that you have a nice complement to OmniFocus, where you have a lot of stuff that can, not only once you've referenced it, they can all kind of reference each other and kind of gain a sort of meaning within themselves as a result.
One question from a little while back, I thought this one would probably come up, is the difference between DEVONthink and Evernote, and what drew you to DEVONthink instead of using Evernote? What were some key factors there?
So I can't go through a bullet list because it's more feel, a gut feel for me. I think maybe one thing was that I liked one bullet point. I liked having things local. I like the having my files on my computer, and I can sync it and do what I want with it. That's a big part of it. That's probably what originally drew me to it, I would say, and just I got used to it, and I liked it. So I didn't play with Evernote very much because this did everything that I would have wanted Evernote to do.
I was going to say one thing with DEVONthink is you can have multiple databases as well. And I don't think there's really any practical limit. So if you want to share some of your data set with people, you can use that to split it up. I think just overall even though Evernote has quite a powerful search, I think DEVONthink really takes that to the next level with their AI search capabilities and so forth. So, and I think I definitely know people who use both of them as well. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be Evernote for personal things, for instance, and maybe DEVONthink is what you use for research projects. Yeah. So I think a lot of these come down to very personal decisions about what is the best tool for the job. And as Kourosh was saying, kind of which one do you feel most at home at? Which one do you feel most confident in? And if you do want to be able to decide exactly where the data is stored and everything like that, that's definitely where DEVONthink shines. And Philip was asking, would you recommend, hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly, Sonke Aaron's book as a way to understand the concepts in your book?
As a way to understand the concepts in my book? Yeah, maybe. I found it hugely helpful. I mean, it's how I kind of... I guess the parallel would be like with getting things done to creating flow with OmniFocus. It's like I integrate the concepts and the ideas, but I don't have I don't do the full justice to the ideas. You know, this is more in a context of a tool. I think he does. I thought it was a really good job. So whether it's necessary or not, I don't know, but. I liked it. I could recommend it as a good book.
And one approach would be to start with your book and then go back to the fundamentals after having some practice with it. Does that make sense?
I see.
Able to take a deeper dive into it. Because I think in your book, it seems like you introduce kind of the core elements of the approach.
All right. So the question was which direction to go? Read mine first and then Aaron's, or the other direction? Do I have that right?
I think that's the essence of it. Yeah. Is it like, I guess going back to your getting things done example, someone could use OmniFocus without having read the Getting Things Done book, but they might get more value if they went back to those basic principles and kind of had an understanding of it beyond the technology.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on, and maybe it's probably more analogous to like older school video games. Nowadays they do a really good job, but like older school, you would like the question is, do you read the book first and then try it, or then do you just try it and then read the instructions? Nowadays they've done a great job, I think, more and more of blending the instructions and the gameplay. So it doesn't quite work as well anymore. But if you were the type to read the instructions first, then I would do that. And then if you just want to play with the thing and try to figure it out there, you could do that too. I personally was an instructions first person.
Yeah, I tend to gravitate to that as well.
Yeah.
And some of these more foundational books, like Getting Things Done, I find it's useful to reread them and to re-examine them and to consider them separate from the technology and so forth.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's really nice to be shown how to use technology with a specific methodology, and that's where your books, I think, are really kind of hit that sweet spot where it's not just a list of feature descriptions. You really talk about the methodologies as well as the technology. Yeah, Mark, he says, how do you decide when to keep your notes in a single database or when to start a new one? So what would be some kind of general guidelines?
I'm continually asking that same question myself, especially because I did come from a set of just like a bunch of databases that like, oh, these seem to be related, and threw those into one. But I think the idea is similar to what I was describing about creativity. If you have like this kind of general fuzzy vision of where you're heading with your thoughts, I think then they might go into a single database. Like if you have, like I think Lumen, the original kind of creator of the Zettelkasten and approach, who had this in the mid 20th century, basically on index cards. I think, if I understood it correctly, it had this idea of trying to like create some harmony of thought in sociology and like bring together very different, disparate ideas. So I'm doing something similar. I've noticed that, at least with myself, for like my Slipbox, I'm thinking about ideas of psychoanalysis, ideas of psychiatry, ideas of story, and creativity, a little bit about productivity as well, spiritual concept, things like that. I feel like there's what is this thing that I'm trying to figure out, and I don't know. So things like that go in there. So as an example, I'm deciding, do I want to add very detailed like inserts and psychotropic medications into that group? I'm like, it doesn't quite fit. I can see how but it's like, it doesn't seem like it's part of it. So I might create a separate database for that. But I have to make that decision. Do I want to do that or not? And so it's not a simple decision, but it is a decision that requires reflection and what is the body of knowledge that you are creating? What's the lighthouse that you're looking at in the distance?
I guess along a similar line, there's a question, do things ever move from your Slipbox database, or do they kind of take up permanent status in them?
Well, they take up permanent status, but I use them as reference to, let's say I gather, 10 notes on an idea, and then that becomes, if I have some idea, I'm like, what have I written about it? And there they are. And then that becomes either a post or a write-up of some sort. It was actually what I used to originate the Taking Smart Note with DEVONthink itself. There was about 10 notes in there. That obviously became a lot more than that, but that was kind of the seed of what eventually developed into a book.
I believe DEVONthink is fairly forgiving in the sense if you create too many databases or not enough, it's not like it's cast in stone. You can merge things together or split them apart. And
totally.
Yeah, and that's another consideration. I think that's where people get stuck around OmniFocus is there's this concern that, I'm going to do it wrong and I'm going to create the wrong folder structure or something like that. And I'd say that's really the beauty of digital tools is it can be morphed into many different shapes and take many different forms. So kind of what I tend to do is take my best guess at, what structure will work, knowing that I'll probably change it, whether it's next week or a year from now or something like that.
I can add one other thought to it, that you have, you want to think about like, what is DEVONthink going to be recommending to you? If you want this to be a thing that's recommended based on your other stuff, that might be another way to think it through. So that idea of like having the inserts of a medication in there, like, I don't want this recommended. I don't think this is kind of what I'm looking at. That might be useful in this other context, so that's why it goes in this other database. That might be a way to think of it.
I would also think in terms of who you're going to be sharing the data with, if anybody. And if something is kind of general research material versus highly personal notes, then I would think it would make sense to keep those in totally separate databases so you're not worried about exposing anything that's you don't
Sure.
want to be revealed. There's a question, good one about other note apps, and DEVONthink, it seems like has a reasonably robust Markdown editor, but there are other ones like AI Writer and Ulysses and things like that
Yeah.
I know people are maybe very attached to at this point. And
Yeah.
so what guidance would you have around using those alongside DEVONthink?
What you can do is you can go into have it show you the file in the Finder, and then you can choose what the default app is for that type of thing. So you might have your default app for text files or Markdown files being IA Writer. I like IA Writer a lot. I also like Typora and like a number of other ones as well. I'll kind of bounce between them. And then what you do is that you can hit Shift Command O on any of those while you're in DEVONthink, and it'll open it in that app. So you can work on your file in your favorite text editor, and you'd be fine. And then similarly, if I was describing at the beginning, if you can use DEVONthink to index files, it's called indexing. You can have a set of notes outside of DEVONthink. DEVONthink just looks at them and says, "Okay, I see everything in that folder." And if you have, let's say, Ulysses connecting to it or Obsidian connecting to it, then those can all be sharing the same set of files. And so if you want to use one, that's fine, and then you can always go back to DEVONthink and just see what it recommends based on what it's figured out between them. So there's no reason to say I won't use that because I'm using DEVONthink.
One way I think of DEVONthink, this might be a bit of an oversimplification, but it's kind of a supercharged Finder in some ways, where you can treat it like
sure.
a file system. It'll even pick up on the open.md files with this app, those sorts of things. But you've got a lot more search capabilities than you would have in the Finder. So is that at least somewhat accurate assessment?
I think so. I think you can add all the other things like smart rules and smart guides, and all these. It does quite a bit.
And you mentioned Obsidian a moment ago. That was one of the other ones that came up. And Obsidian, I know you can this is an app where you can simply point it at a folder full of text files, and it'll work within that context. So my understanding is you could point it to, I guess it couldn't be stored within DEVONthink at that point. Would it need to be an external? It
would be external. I've played with that. I haven't dedicated myself to it yet. I have played with it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some rumor that there will be a change in the wiki linking system in DEVONthink that would allow for double brackets as well as word and alias. And since Obsidian does the double brackets for its wiki linking, I think it would be kind of a neat sort of overlap. Part of what stopped me from jumping over and doing that merge thing is I don't like the double brackets. I much prefer the system of the just words and aliases.
Because I know there's a lot of topics that inevitably come up around DEVONthink versus Roam, DEVONthink versus Notion, all those sorts of things. And
sure.
Yeah.
I've looked at not all of them, but I've looked at a good number of these sorts. I've looked at Roam Research. I've looked at Obsidian, and they're good. They do what they do well. But again, I feel like I'm at home with DEVONthink, and I just kind of if they can work in that sort of branched method, if I can make it so that I can like link to them and go to them, then I can see them as becoming a part of integrated in whatever systems I use. But I as much as I tend to be on it looks like I'm on some frontier by writing a book and I know stuff or something. I'm really very slow in like adapting to things. I glom onto something. I'm like, this is good, and then and if it's not, I'm just going to keep hammering at it until it is good, and then that becomes a book.
That's maybe the best the way most books are born when it comes right down to it, I think. One key distinction as well between DEVONthink and something like Notion is that DEVONthink can be a repository for a huge amount of files. You can store like multi-gigabyte videos in there and huge PDFs and things like that.
Totally.
Whereas with a cloud-based system, you don't have that sort of same level of file management, I guess would be another way of looking at it. So if you're a researcher and you're accumulating a lot of research material, and you want to be able to have a local copy, so that if you're on a plane or in your cabin in the woods or something like that, and you want to make sure you have it all at your disposal, that's where I think DEVONthink really shines.
Yeah.
You're really in charge with that data, and it's also so easy to move it out of DEVONthink. I think you can just drag out the contents, and you've got a bunch of files and folders in the Finder. So
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it just feels nice that I pick up my computer and it feels like it's in my computer.
Right. Any recommendations around using the slip box method outside of the common ones, like studying and research, like in more of a business-oriented context?
So, going back to those organizational principles is like, what do you want to be reminded about when? So if, you were doing, something that's related to law, for instance, or business or something like that, I can imagine, like, if there's a case that's like, this might be useful to see when I see this, then having that connection could be very nice. And maybe you summarize your thoughts for it in some way. And you have that there, like, okay, this is and then now you've got everything that you've thought through already, not only ready to go, but also contextually kind of stored because you had the links there. So why did I think of that? Oh, yeah, that's why. Instead of having to reprocess all of those again.
And it seems a lot of this comes down to establishing links between information and having the computer essentially do the work of creating those associations and so forth.
To some degree, yeah. I mean, it definitely doesn't replace your need to associate, which is, some of the things that DEVONthink will recommend are like, I'm not sure that's all that, and some of them are like, oh, that's great. What a neat idea. But it's still, what you could do then is with that information is you can create those links to those notes that seem like, okay, this thing's related, and I would embed that in the context in the body of the note itself. So, if in that note that I had like about character and I thought story was related, I would be sure to write some sentence about the word of story. Characters are a part of a story, and then it would light up. And that way, because I don't want to rely on
AI.
DEVONthink's AI. I look at that as being like very useful in my thinking through what goes into the note. But then but I want it to be in the note and like this is what I thought through. It becomes more personal. It becomes more integrated within my engagement of the work.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So you need to do some work up front. I think one of the challenges is, I know when I do work like this, sometimes I'm wondering, am I ever going to need this? But then like a year later, I'll realize I have exactly what I need to develop this workshop or something like that. And suddenly it becomes something very easy versus having to kind of figure it out from scratch and be faced with this mountain of information I've collected over a long period of time. So it becomes very much a practice, I think, of if you're going to the trouble of collecting this information, why not actually make it more useful using both your own kind of linking and classifications as well as the algorithmic aspects of it.
Yeah. But once you've made those contextual links, it's good to have those stored.
Yep. Okay, fabulous. And Mark is wondering if you have any experience with margin notes. This is something he's just starting to explore.
What's the name of it?
It's called Margin Note. I think I actually played a little bit with that as well.
I don't think so.
It was on Federico Vitici that mentioned that one.
Oh, okay. Very cool. All right, thanks for mentioning it. But I don't know
add that to the list. And some claim that he says it's his easiest way to manage notes on PDFs. Those notes are exportable. I've thought of exporting to DEVONthink and then linking back to PDFs and margin notes.
That sounds like an interesting path. I can look into that. That sounds great, Mark. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. Just generally, PDFs, I know when I'm reading things like your book in electronic form, I'll be highlighting within there. How does that kind of relate to this whole process where you're essentially going through and saying this quote or this paragraph really stands out for me? How would that kind of factor in when you're looking for things in DEVONthink and linking them together and so forth?
Sure. So how do I go about highlighting and
Or what would that bring to the table? The fact that you have PDFs within DEVONthink that have highlights and annotations and things like that.
oh yeah. Well, I mean, they're there. I do have. What I'll do is I will go through PDFs, and DEVONthink has its own PDF tools in there that are useful, and I'll do the highlights and underlines. But usually, what I'll do is I'll take those highlights and underlines and convert them into notes, or so. And then I'll refer back to the original source. I'd once again rather have my thought about it more. And I get this from Aaron's, I think, that rather than just copy a quote or something like that, I might say, why is this meaningful to me? And then once you say that, it's much more a part of you as well as your system.
Something we were talking about earlier this week as well, too, is I was mentioning how I like to use MindNode when I'm kind of just taking a seed of an idea and doing something with it. And you made a great suggestion of actually storing those mind nodes within DEVONthink, so they become part of the kind of the wealth of information that's captured in there. And I can continue to deal with them as individual files, but they also live alongside notes that I've taken and maybe research documents I've collected and so forth, and just being able to link everything together.
Totally, and I just had the thought too, MindNode has its own linking mechanisms too, so you could take links from DEVONthink, OmniFocus, or otherwise, and you can paste those links somehow in MindNode, nodes. I just thought of that anyway.
Okay. Yeah, great idea. Yeah, one way to think of this too is you're collecting a lot of information in different forms, whether it's something you've scribbled on a cocktail napkin or something you've put into a notes app or a MindNode or whatever it happens to be. And DEVONthink can be a way of really pulling together all these different types of information into something cohesive and just having it all in one spot, I think is really valuable.
Yeah.
I know Kourosh wasn't able to go into a lot of detail on some of the things he covered, like wiki links and different ways of linking, but I know he does cover that in depth in the book. So he walks through the different mechanisms and why you prefer the one you do and kind of the pros and cons of all of those. So definitely a little bit of an investment in learning in that, but then you have this, it's kind of similar to OmniFocus. If you invest in really understanding the tool, then you've got a really powerful tool at your disposal. And same with DEVONthink, if you're willing to put in, I think a fairly modest amount of time to learning it in the grand scheme of things, and you've got a real data powerhouse at your fingertips that I'm sure you'll find many different uses for. Well, thanks so much again, Kourosh, and thanks to everyone who joined today and everyone who's watching the live session. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon.
All right.
Okay, take care.